Good morning and welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari and we're glad to have you on. We have Dr. Asad Mohammed on the video there and we are going to talk with him a little bit. Good morning. How are you going,
Good
Dr.
morning.
Mohammed?
Good morning, Dr. Tiwari. Thank you
How
for having me
things?
here this morning. Very
Let
good,
me
very
let me
good.
just ask them to raise your volume so we can hear you a little better. You hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you very well.
All right, good. First of all, thanks for coming on the program. I had intended to have you much earlier, actually, but one thing led to another and we did not get to it. But I'm glad to have you this morning. I've always had a lot of respect for your insight into development and your practical application of that knowledge and insight in the things that you do. And I thought we would tap it now, now that the budget has been read. I don't know if you want to start by maybe giving a response to the budget in your own way, that is to say, from your perspective, and then we would take it from there.
Okay. Thank you very much. My opinion is the budget, the way it has historically been presented, is not a very good tool to understanding the state of government's policy in any particular area. Normally, what it is a collection of individual actions that are not coherently related to each other, and it's difficult to see how it relates to any broader thinking. And I would say this is classic in this particular case of this budget. We are told in this budget that there is a 3-year framework that this budget is part of, but we see nothing that suggests what the framework is and how this year's particular projects or actions or allocations relate to that 3-year budget. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we do have some frameworks in place that we are supposedly following. We have the Vision 2030 policy of the present government. We have our commitments to reporting on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a roadmap, which would have had some stops along the way. And we have various commitments that we've made to international agreements. So surely we could reference the various actions we've taken in place of some of these sort of landmarks as go along the road, and that was notably absent from the budget. Specifically in the broad areas of sustainable development, climate change, energy efficiency, there may be some interesting actions and allocations that are made. Again, not coherent in a coherent framework, and some of them actually contradictory with each other on some of these broader goals. So those are some broad comments I'd like to make on the present budget.
Yeah, okay. Well, those are insightful comments, and I think they are a good frame. They establish a good frame to continue the discussion. So, I mean, literally, you are saying that there's an absence of what you might call a philosophical anchor. And secondly, there is little overarching connectivity, either with the Vision 2030 document, the Roadmap Committee's document, the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. And really what you have here is a hodgepodge of issues that have been put together for fiscal support. And you wonder, given the lack of philosophical perspective, the lack of coherence, the lack of alignment, how it's going to impact in a way that sees results of value. I know I'm interpreting you here, but I mean, I think I understand your thinking well enough to make that kind of summary of your position. But let's say, there are a number of projects in the budget that have to do with coastal erosion, for instance, and trying to stem the tide for coastal erosion. In Matlot, I think he mentioned Mayaro, Guayari, some other places. All right, so there's that element. Then there is a lot of emphasis on agriculture. He doesn't talk about what kind of agriculture, but I suspect that there's some sustainability thinking in relation to that. I mean, we have a big food import bill, food crises everywhere in the world, and we want to try and feed ourselves. So there is the talk about the solar park that they want to do. I have heard before, because of talking to individuals who have been involved in it, both in the private sector and at the university, that the solar park is supposed to be a collaborative idea between Shell and BP and the University of the West Indies, and so on. So you have these elements that seem to be taking you in the direction of, what can I say, renewable energy or sustainable practices, etc. Do you think it is enough to do that? And are we being unfair to the minister and the government in asking them to do more than simply mention these things and try to get them off the ground?
Well, let's make one little point on the first general discussion we had. If you don't have a reporting framework that has specific targets, you don't know whether you're doing good or bad.
Right.
You don't know whether you're meeting those. So how does the Ministry of Planning Monitoring Unit know whether the PSIP project is successful? How does the supposed monitoring unit in the Prime Minister's office that monitors decisions and policies know whether they're being successful, unless you articulate the policies and the targets according to these reporting frameworks? So that's a general comment. Again, I'd like to emphasize, we don't know how well we've done on these targets over the last few budgets over a period of time, and we don't know what are the targets we actually set in which these projects are located. So I'm going to take some of the examples that you have just to initiate it. You've mentioned that we have a few projects around dealing with coastal management. In fact, we don't. What was listed are 3 specific coastal protection projects. Yet we have had a draft coastal zone policy, which was developed, you may be aware, it was under your term as the Minister of Planning, with a team led from the Institute of Marine Affairs. And that was a broad, comprehensive policy that was supposed to be implemented as policy and subsidiary legislation under the Planning and Facilitation and Development Act. I don't know where that is. In fact, I don't know where the act is. Barbados, for example, has had a coastal zone unit for 30 years now. So what you have is a very proactive, very active coastal protection unit in the Ministry of Works. And therefore, what you see are projects around coastal protection, but not coastal management or coastal rehabilitation in the context of climate change and sea level rise. That is a broader issue that we should position these small individual investments in coastal protection within.
All right.
So
let me jump in there for a minute. Simply, because we have people watching and they are listening to you, and we need to make them understand. One, you're talking about coastal protection as an responsive action from the Ministry of Works. But you are saying that needs to be located in a larger connected system of Ministry of Planning, committed to sustainable development of Trinidad and Tobago. It needs to be connected to your marine conservation strategy of the IMA, and linked also to whatever the EMA is doing in relation to the management of the environment, because these things are connected. And you are saying that one of the problems we have is doing things without context, doing things without framework, doing things without connectivity, and doing things that ultimately are not holistic, so that you cannot get the value of it even when you do good. Am I correct in interpreting you that way?
That's exactly the point. Good coastal protection unit in the Ministry of Works, very proactive. But who connects the policy in the Ministry of Planning, in the research in the Institute of Marine Affairs, the environmental and coastal policy in the EMA, you're very right, and the drainage division. No one is connecting those various things, and nobody is connected, for example, to the work of the fisheries division, offshore resources, petroleum resources, pollution, and those matters in the coastal zone. All the issues, for example, when you have a disruption of a pipeline that affects one thing, is that broad area of coastal zone policy and management. And coastal zone policy in a time of climate change and sea
Yes,
level
of
rise
course.
is an existential issue in Caribbean islands.
That's right.
And many of our colleague countries have taken this thing very seriously. In the OECS countries, you have ocean governance, you have coastal zone policy, you have blue economy issues being raised. But in Trinidad, we are happy to proceed along with thinking that we have coastal policies because we have 3 rehabilitation projects. And I don't want to be unfair. Maybe there is a larger connection that is not clear in the way in which the budget is presented. But having worked on that framework a few years ago of the broad coastal zone policy and the legislative and legal requirements for its implementation and coordination, that I know there's been very little progress for about 6 or 7 years in that area.
Yeah, and even the planning and facilitation bill, I mean, we have problems, first of all, with its proclamation, and secondly, with its application, because that was connected with basically a developmental policy and a broad framework for developmental intervention that was very environmentally sensitive and very planning for sustainable development sensitive. And I mean, really, we don't see any of that present at all.
Minister Tiwari, I don't want to butter you up anyway, but you know, the relationship between the Ministry of Planning and its role and functions and the Ministry of Finance is not well organized in the way we go about doing budgeting.
Yes.
In fact, the policies and the priorities to drive what we need to finance and what projects we should be doing and how they're coordinating is really a role more for the Ministry of Planning. And yet, we give up these roles to a Ministry of Finance and a budget statement without clear idea that those fiscal policies undertaken in the budget really connects to the broader development agenda and the various policy frameworks within which you operate, where the Ministry of Planning is really the keeper and not the Ministry of Finance. But the power is with the Ministry of Finance in allocation.
Of course it is, because of the money. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought that the unstated reality by the Minister of Finance saying that we now have a medium-term framework until 2024, and then saying that we have a fiscal framework until 2024, and then saying that we have an expenditure policy until 2024, was basically saying that, look, me, the Minister of Finance, I have now taken responsibility for the development process in Trinidad and Tobago. I know that there is a Vision 2030. I am willing to take some things from the Roadmap Committee because I sense some influence of the Roadmap Committee on this particular budget. and I'm prepared to listen to what stakeholders are saying. But right now, I am in charge of development, and I am in charge of the money. And basically, I am going to be making policy for the next 3 years. And then he outlines what he hopes to achieve, etc., in fiscal terms, saying that he's going to balance the budget in 2024, and that he's going to have a surplus in 2023, and he's going to have minus 1% growth in 2022. So I think very quietly, not stated at all, we have had a major shift in the structure of policy making and the impact of fiscal policy by the Minister of Finance. And I do not know, I don't know where that is going to lead, quite frankly.
Well, I would like to think that, but I'm not as optimistic as you. And I'll illustrate it very clearly. We may have a 3-year fiscal framework, and that is revenue and expenditure framework, but that should be structured within a 3-year developmental framework. So, for example, in some circumstances, it makes sense to run a deficit. It doesn't make sense to balance the budget. In other times, it makes sense to balance the budget. And that is driven by what the developmental objectives are at the time. It makes sense sometimes to borrow money to achieve objectives. So simply fiscal balance or fiscal security or fiscal conservatism is not necessarily the objectives of a 3-year development framework. Let me give you an example of that, Dr. Tiwari. We have heard in this particular budget around various sides around utility pricing. There's a fiscal approach to it. The utilities cost us too much. Electricity costs us too much. Water costs us too much. And therefore, what we do is we use one of the simplest tools we have available, which is not a comprehensive tool. We look at the utility pricing, what the consumer pays for it. So we have to raise it because it's costing us too much to produce. And then, because it's costing us too much to produce, those at the lower end of the scale will be penalized, so we get them a card. I don't know how this utility card will work because it has to do a lot of various things. And they've increased the subsidy for electricity on a wider range. Now, nowhere in there do I hear about how you link that to electric cars. Nowhere do I see how you link that to your renewables.
Yes.
A renewable project. So what we should be talking about is how are we going to wean the country from poor consumption of electricity, in which the lower income groups have the least flexibility in how they respond to it. Mind you, that little subsidy you have there at the lower end doesn't hide the large subsidies which go to the middle and the upper classes because of poor strategy and tiered pricing of the use of electricity. So yes, you give somebody a couple $100 off on the electricity bill over the year at one end of the scale. On another end of the scale, somebody has vast home consumption of electricity, and they are getting the subsidy, maybe less now, but it's still a larger subsidy than is going to the low income. And we haven't talked about efficiency and incentives for renewables and retooling operations in manufacturing and general operations. So that's on electricity. Let's talk about gas. All right? We are removing the incentive on gas, but we're not hearing about the comprehensive policies around transportation, work from home. We haven't linked transportation policies with digital policies, right? So I know that the Ministry of Planning said they have a e-information policy. They said that. They say the Trinidad is a leader in monitoring systems for reporting on the SDGs and the climate change, that other countries are borrowing our systems. But our own government is not using it in the way it's thinking about its cycle of budgeting. We're not relating to these other factors. So it is clear, let me just make this one last point. It is clear that the types of tools you're seeing being used are fiscal tools. The collection of revenues through utilities and the pricing. And you're not talking about how that is one of the tools in reducing use, changing the nature of use, amount consumption, for example. Water. What about water harvesting at the level of homes? What about incentives for retooling the way we collect and use
All right.
water? Um, Water production and distribution is a highly energy intensive activity. So if we manage water properly and how we win and distribute water, we're also tackling a large part of the cost of energy. The transmission to keep water under pressure in lines takes energy. To produce it centrally and then distribute it over takes a lot. Other countries are thinking about decentralized systems of collection and distributing water, much more responsibility at the level of the homes. These are all part of it. And all we are hearing really are the fiscal elements of it, of sustainable development, energy efficiency, climate change, etc. And we're not seeing how that relates to broader policy frameworks.
Yeah. You know, it is, I mean, some people may not like how I'm going to say this, but I feel I have to say it in order to make the point. You have all this sun in the world, the sunshine in the world, and the power of sunlight. Almost 365 days in the year in this island. And more it is, science is showing how you can tap that and make it work for you. Climate change is creating the condition in which in the rainy season, you have more water than you need for the rest of the year. And the only thing that we are getting out of that is flooding in the rainy season and distress for large numbers of people in their homes, in their communities, etc. You would think that common sense would tell us, let us spend some time, energy, resources, research, application, investment, etc. on these two areas which are natural, they are outside of our control, outside of our domain, but where we have control is how we can tap it, how we can manage it, how we can make it work positively for us rather than being a negative force. What is the conceptual problem, you think, with the government in not seeing and understanding this and bringing the collaborators to bear on these solution issues for Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, like I said, I actually think there is good work in that monitoring unit in the Ministry of Planning, because if they have a monitoring framework of how we exceed our international commitments, that is good. I know of a very positive project presently underway around strengthening resilience in the city of Port of Spain with Habitat for Humanity with some USAID funding. So there are little things that are going on that are positive. What I think is lacking is how we pull those various aspects together in a more comprehensive framework. So, for example, why it is we are producing housing through the HDC, why it is we aren't starting to talk about introducing solar and water harvesting.
And rainwater harvesting in the NHA, yes, of course.
Yes, but HDC, right. Why aren't we starting to think about that particular level of, here the government is actually doing it. Why don't we have, well, I know you started it when you were Ministry of Planning, to start to talk about how do we look at sustainability standards to enhance both planning approvals and building approvals. That is some of the work that would supposed to be done by the National Planning Authority under the Planning and Facilitation and Development Act.
Yeah. So rainwater harvesting and solar power were built into all the new approvals. I don't know if that has been reversed.
I do not know where that is going. So there's a lot of work around there, and you're right. What we're seeing is that the lack of connectivity, and I want to get back to this issue you're talking about. We're only hearing about drainage problems, All right. By the time we have to deal with it as a drainage problem, the problem is already out of control.
That's right.
We need broader thinking around water management.
Exactly, water resource management.
Yeah, water management in the broader sense, so that you start from the hilltop with reforestation programs, with illegal agriculture in the upper watershed. You deal with detention dams. You deal with community enhancement projects in the middle watersheds, and then by the time you reach the Port of Spain, you can't solve the problem. The problem is already created. The engineering solutions are too complex and too expensive if you don't start and deal with water management all the way through the watershed, right? But we have focused too much on the drainage aspects and not on the water management aspects of it. And that is why every time we get a drizzle, it floods. Well, don't talk about Pinal. Pinal, you only have to think about rain and it flooded.
Yeah.
Right? Like they said, a KFC delivery, machine in Pinal is a skidoo. So yes, so the issue of water management and resilience, they all tie together. And I guess what we've seen is a lack of coherence in coordination and policy frameworks and monitoring one. I don't want to sound too much like a policy planner, which I am, but it's clear that these are some of the elements which we are not seeing.
Yeah, it's missing.
I can't see what is happening.
It's
I'm not saying
missing.
it's not worry. It may be there, but the coherence between that and the fiscal policy is not clear to me right now, and that link needs to be strengthened.
All right, I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to respond to this. The theme of the budget is resilience in the face of a global pandemic. Give me 2 or 3 things, just name it, you don't have to explain it, that would really strengthen the resilience capacity of this country if we were serious about it.
Well, let me be very clear. If you look at all the various types of disasters we have, whether they be public health disasters or whether they be natural disasters, you have to focus on a particular subset of our community. All of these disasters have social implications for a large cross-section of our poor, both rural and urban poor. And in a sense, we never coming up with development solutions for those aspects. So if you talk about it, the impacts are always worse. Flooding, hillside damage, social issues, they're always worse in that particular segment of the population. Other elements that are cushioned with better quality construction, higher incomes or consistent incomes and so on, seem to manage. It is not quite. It may be a social problem and there are issues. It's not quite the same problem for the whole society. And I just want to make one comment.
I've got to close now. Okay, so just make your comment and we'll close.
Yeah, all the issue around digitization and schooling has emphasized the fact that more than half our population don't have access to the digital world, and they suffer the most under digitization. So digitization alone, without dealing with that developmental issue, will take us nowhere and leave large parts of population behind.
So we will create a divide here, just as the world is escalating a divide.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. We've been talking to Dr. Asad Mohammed. He is an urban planner and a sustainable development specialist. And we want to thank him for talking with us this morning. We'll bring you on another time because these are important issues and these are issues that we need to keep alive. So I thank you for watching. This is Bo Tiwari. You are watching Brighter Morning with Bo on MCTV, Multicultural TV. We break now for the news with Andrew Chan.